The cardboard box hit my hands before I could say Merry Christmas. Inside were my childhood photos, dusty frames with cracked glass, faded construction paper cards I'd made in second grade, a baby blanket I'd forgotten existed, yellowed at the edges. My mother stood in the doorway, one hand still gripping the brass knob, the porch light buzzing and flickering above her head like a dying firefly. Behind her, the living room lamp, the one with the cream-colored shade I'd helped her pick out at Target 6 years ago, cast long, uneven shadows across the beige carpet. My 5-year-old son tugged at my coat sleeve, his mittened hand small and confused. "Kyle needs to live here now," my mother said, her voice flat and final, like she was reading from a script she'd rehearsed. "We've decided we need space from your negativity. Don't come back without calling first." The hum of the refrigerator inside felt louder than it should have been, drowning out the soft sound of snow beginning to fall again. My father sat motionless on the couch, shoulders hunched, staring at his weathered hands folded in his lap. Kyle stood by the brick fireplace, arms crossed over his faded band t-shirt, smirking in that way he'd perfected since middle school. I'd been sending them $3,200 a month for 8 years. 96 payments. $307,200. This was my thank you. I grew up in a small suburban neighborhood just outside a Midwestern city, the kind of place where everyone mowed their lawns on Saturday mornings in perfect diagonal lines and nobody talked about money problems out loud. Sprinklers ran on timers. Halloween decorations went up the first week of October. But inside our pale yellow house with the white shutters, money was the only thing that mattered. My brother Kyle was 3 years younger than me, charming in that careless, effortless way that made adults forgive everything, missed curfews, failed classes, borrowed money never returned. I was the serious one, the responsible one, the one who got a job at 16 folding clothes at the Gap, who studied late into the night with a desk lamp and highlighters while Kyle threw parties in the basement that left beer cans scattered across the concrete floor. My parents never said it directly, but I felt it in every interaction, every subtle choice they made. Kyle was the favorite, the one they laughed with, the one whose mistakes were just growing pains, and I was the fallback plan. The insurance policy. The one who would always be there. After nursing school, I moved to Denver, married James, a quiet, steady software engineer who made me feel safe, and built a life that felt stable and calm and mine. My parents stayed behind in that same house, and when my father's retirement income fell short 5 years into it, they called me on a Tuesday evening. Not Kyle. Never Kyle. Just me. They needed help. The mortgage was behind. Foreclosure letters were piling up on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker. I started sending checks. $3,200 a month. Every single month. For 8 years. I worked 12-hour shifts in the ICU at Denver General, came home to my son's bedtime routine, bath, pajamas, 3 picture books read in the rocking chair, then opened my laptop at the kitchen table to make sure the automatic transfer went through. Kyle bartended part-time at a sports bar downtown, lived rent-free in a cramped studio apartment my parents helped him afford, dated a rotating cast of women whose names I could never keep straight, and contributed exactly nothing. But I never said anything. That's what I'd been trained to do since childhood. Stay quiet, keep working, don't make waves, don't burden anyone with your feelings. Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear, the kind of winter day where the sky looks like pale blue glass and your breath hangs in the air. James and I loaded the car with carefully wrapped gifts for my parents, a cashmere scarf for my mother, a leather wallet for my father, and my son's favorite stuffed reindeer with the jingle bell sewn into its antler. We drove 3 hours through light snow, passing farmland and highway rest stops decorated with tinsel garland, my son asleep in his car seat in the back, his head tilted to one side. I had a key to their house. I'd had one since I was 16, a silver copy made at the hardware store on Main Street, but when I turned it in the lock that evening, nothing happened. The key slid in, but the deadbolt didn't budge. The lock had been changed. I knocked 3 soft taps, then harder. My mother opened the door halfway, not all the way like she usually did, holding that cardboard box like a shield between us. Her expression was something I'd never seen before, cold, rehearsed, resolved. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer right away. Just looked past me, at the driveway where James was unbuckling our son from his car seat, at the snow starting to fall again in fat, lazy flakes. Then she said it, her words measured and deliberate. Kyle needed to live there now. They needed space from my negativity. I could feel my son's hand slip into mine, his little fingers tightening around my thumb. I tried to process the words, turning them over in my mind, but they didn't make sense. Negativity? I hadn't argued with them in years. I barely called anymore, just sent the money on the first of every month and got a brief thank you text once in a while, if that. "You changed the locks," I said quietly, more a statement than a question. My mother's jaw tightened. A muscle twitched near her temple. "We thought it was best." Inside, through the gap in the door, I could see Kyle unpacking cardboard boxes in the narrow hallway. My hallway. The house I'd been keeping from foreclosure. My father finally looked up from the couch, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared somewhere past my left shoulder, at the porch railing, at nothing. I felt something crack inside me, small and sharp, like ice splitting under pressure. "I've been sending you money for 8 years, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but steady. My mother's face didn't change. Her expression stayed frozen. "That was your choice. We never asked for it." The words landed like a slap across the face. I stood there, holding my son's mittened hand and a cardboard box full of my own childhood, and realized with perfect clarity that they'd planned this. They'd changed the locks days ago, maybe weeks ago. They'd packed my things in advance. They'd decided, together, that I was disposable. That I'd served my purpose. What I didn't know yet, standing there on that cold porch with Christmas lights blinking red and green on the neighbor's roof, was just how big a mistake they'd made. The next morning, I canceled the automatic transfer. My hands shook as I logged into the bank account at my kitchen table, the morning sun streaming through the window and warming the back of my neck, but I didn't hesitate. 8 years of payments, $307,000, gone in a single click of the mouse. James sat across from me, his coffee untouched and going cold in its blue ceramic mug. "You okay?" he asked softly. I wasn't sure. I felt hollow and sharp at the same time, like something inside me had finally broken loose after years of being held down. Then I did something I should have done years ago. I called the mortgage company. I told the representative I needed a complete payment history and a copy of the current deed. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. The representative put me on hold. I could hear faint classical music, tinny and distant, the buzz of our kitchen light fixture overhead, the hum of the dishwasher running its rinse cycle in the background. When she came back on the line 3 minutes later, she sounded confused, hesitant. "Ma'am, are you aware you're listed as a co-owner on this property?" My breath caught in my throat. "What?" She repeated it slowly, like she thought I hadn't heard. 5 years ago, when my parents refinanced to avoid foreclosure, when the bank was threatening to auction the house on the courthouse steps, they'd added my name to the deed. I co-signed the new mortgage paperwork. I owned 50% of that house. Legally. On paper. They'd never mentioned it. Not once. Not when I asked how the refinance went, not in any of the thank you texts, not ever. I thanked her, my voice mechanical, hung up, and sat very still. The refrigerator cycled on with a soft hum. Somewhere down the street, I could hear a dog barking. Part of me had known something was off. Part of me had been waiting for years for the other shoe to drop. I spent the rest of the day searching online for real estate attorneys in my parents' area, scrolling through websites and reviews, reading bios. By evening, I had a consultation scheduled for the day after Christmas. My grandmother, my father's mother, called me that night around 9. She was 82, sharp as ever despite her age, living alone in a quiet cottage with blue shutters 2 towns over. "I heard what happened," she said, her voice low and steady over the phone line. "Your mother told everyone you had a breakdown. Said you showed up drunk and started screaming in the driveway." I closed my eyes and leaned my forehead against the cool kitchen wall. Of course they did. Of course they were rewriting history already. "I didn't, Grandma." I know you didn't, she interrupted, her tone firm. I've known Linda for 40 years, since your father brought her home the first time. She's always been good at rewriting history, changing the narrative. There was a pause, the kind that felt weighted and intentional, loaded with years of observation. Your grandfather used to say something. He said people who hide things on paper need to be fixed on paper. You understand what I mean? I did. I understood perfectly. I started printing everything that night after my son went to bed. 8 years of bank statements, transaction by transaction. Mortgage payment confirmations with dates and amounts highlighted in yellow. Emails where my mother thanked me for helping out just a little while longer. Text messages from my father asking if the transfer went through yet, followed by grateful emojis. I highlighted dates with a neon green marker. I made notes in the margins in blue ink. I bought a 3-ring binder at the office supply store and labeled it in block letters with a black Sharpie, evidence. I organized everything chronologically, added sticky tabs to key pages, printed a summary sheet on the first page with total amounts calculated to the penny. By the time I was done, it was past midnight. The house was silent except for the soft tick of the clock in the hallway. James came into the office, saw the thick folder on the desk with its neat sections and color-coded tabs, and nodded slowly. You're not backing down this time. It wasn't a question. I shook my head. Not this time. My hands felt steady. My mind felt clear. For the first time in 8 years, maybe longer, I felt like I was in control. The next day, I added more documents. Screenshots of the deed showing my name. The original refinance paperwork I'd signed 5 years ago, which I'd scanned and saved in a folder labeled Important Documents. A spreadsheet I created showing every payment, every month, color-coded and totaled. I even printed the text conversation from Christmas Eve where I'd asked my mother what was happening and she'd responded with a single sentence, "We need space." 3 words. That's all I'd gotten. I made copies of everything. One set for me, one for the attorney, one locked in our safe deposit box at the bank. The attorney's name was Martin Cross. He was in his late 50s, calm and methodical in a way that immediately put me at ease, with a desk covered in neat stacks of folders organized by colored labels and a coffee mug that said "Title Disputes Solved Here" in bold letters. His office smelled like leather and old paper. I laid the binder in front of him, the pages crisp and organized. He opened it, adjusted his reading glasses, scanned the first few pages, then leaned back in his leather chair. It creaked softly. "This is clean," he said, tapping a finger on the summary page. "Very clean. You documented everything." I explained the whole story, the 8 years of payments without a single month missed, the Christmas Eve ambush, the lock change, the cardboard box, my mother's denial, Call moving into a house he'd never contributed a dime toward. He took notes on a yellow legal pad with a blue ballpoint pen, his handwriting small and precise. When I finished, he looked up. "You own 50% of this property. You co-signed the refinance, which means you're on the deed as a legal owner. Your parents can't just kick you out of an asset you legally own. They can't change the locks on property you own half of. What can I do?" I asked, my hands folded tightly in my lap. He tapped his pen against the yellow pad, thinking. 2 options. 1, they buy out your equity stake. The house is worth approximately $425,000 based on recent comps in that neighborhood, so your 50% is $212,500. If they can't pay that, and I'm guessing they can't, we move to option 2, which is partition sale. We file with the court. The court forces the sale of the property, and you get your 50% of the net proceeds after the mortgage is paid off. How long does that take? I asked. He tilted his head slightly. If they refuse to negotiate? 4 to 6 months, sometimes longer depending on the court calendar. But most people settle once they realize we're serious. Once they understand there's no way out. He pulled up a letterhead template on his computer and started typing, the keys clicking in a steady rhythm. I'm going to send them a formal demand letter. They'll have 30 days to respond. It'll lay out the facts, the legal reality, and give them their options. The letter went out 3 days later by certified mail, the kind that requires a signature. I didn't tell anyone except James and my grandmother. I went back to work, picked up extra shifts to keep busy, kept my routines steady and quiet and normal. But inside, everything felt different. I felt lighter, clearer. Like I'd been carrying a weight for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. 2 weeks later, on a gray Tuesday afternoon, my mother called. I was folding laundry in the bedroom, matching socks into pairs. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was tight when I played it back, higher pitched than usual, almost frantic. Rebecca, we need to talk about this legal nonsense. You're being ridiculous. Family doesn't sue family. This is insane. Call me back immediately. I deleted it. My father tried next the following day, leaving a rambling message about how I was misunderstanding the situation and making things worse for everyone and embarrassing the family. I deleted that one too. Calls in a single text message 2 days later. Seriously. I blocked his number. Martin called me in mid-January, his voice calm over the phone. They want to meet. I told them only if I'm present as your legal counsel. Where? I asked. Their house. Neutral ground, technically, since you own half of it. I made that point very clear. The meeting happened on a Tuesday evening in late January. The sun was already setting, the sky turning that dusky purple-gray of winter. I walked into that house with Martin beside me, his leather briefcase in one hand and a folder thicker than mine in the other. My mother sat at the kitchen table, her hands folded tightly on the worn wood surface. My father stood by the counter near the sink, arms crossed over his flannel shirt. Kyle wasn't there. Martin had made it very clear in his email that this meeting was between the deed holders only. The overhead light flickered once, a quick stutter, then held. The refrigerator hummed in the corner, the same sound I'd grown up hearing. My mother spoke first, her voice sharp. This is insane, Rebecca. You can't just— Martin raised one hand, calm but firm, cutting her off mid-sentence. Mrs. Calloway, let's keep this professional. Your daughter owns 50% of this property. That's not an opinion. That's not up for debate. It's a legal fact recorded with the county. He opened his folder with deliberate slowness, pulled out a copy of the deed, and placed it on the table in front of her. My name was right there, printed in black ink, clear as daylight, next to Robert and Linda Calloway. My father's face drained of color. He looked like he might be sick. We didn't think it mattered, my mother said weakly, her voice losing its edge. You weren't living here. We didn't think— That's not how property ownership works, Martin replied, his tone even and measured. It doesn't matter if someone lives in the property or not. Ownership is ownership. Rebecca has 2 options she's willing to offer you. Option 1. You buy out her equity stake for $212,500. That's half the current market value. My mother's voice went cold again. We don't have that kind of money. You know we don't. Then we proceed to option 2, Martin said evenly, without emotion. Partition sale. We file with the court. The court orders the property sold. The mortgage gets paid off first, then Rebecca gets 50% of whatever's left, and you get the other 50%. There was silence. Complete silence. I could hear the clock ticking above the stove, each second marked by a soft click. The faint creak of the floor under my father's weight as he shifted uncomfortably. The hum of the heating vent pushing warm air into the room. My mother looked at me then, really looked at me, for the first time in years. Her eyes were hard. You'd actually do this? Force us to sell? Force your own parents out of their home? I met her gaze and kept my voice soft but absolutely steady. You locked me out on Christmas Eve. You told me my help didn't matter. You let Kyle move into a house I've been paying for. Yes, I'll do this. Martin cleared his throat softly. There is a third option we can discuss. A settlement option. Rebecca is removed from the deed and the mortgage. In exchange, you repay the full amount of her contributions over the past 8 years. That's $307,200. We can arrange a reasonable timeline for the sale, and Rebecca gets paid from the proceeds. You'd have more control over the process this way. My father finally spoke, his voice hoarse. We'd have to sell the house either way. Yes, Martin said simply. No judgment, just fact. But this way, you control the process. You choose the realtor. You choose the timing within reason. You downsize on your terms instead of the court's terms. And Rebecca gets what she's actually owed, not just half the equity, but repayment for 8 years of mortgage payments she made on your behalf. My mother's hands tightened on the edge of the table, her knuckles going white. This is cruel, Rebecca. This is vindictive. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. No. Cruel was changing the locks on Christmas Eve. Cruel was handing me a box of photos and telling me not to come back. This is just paper. This is just fairness. 3 months later, in early April when the trees were just starting to bud, the house sold. My parents moved into a 2-bedroom condo closer to town, something modest they could actually afford on their retirement income. Kyle found a rental apartment on the other side of the city and stopped responding to family group texts entirely. I got a cashier's check for $307,200, deposited it into a high-yield savings account, and didn't tell anyone outside my immediate family. James and I spent that year's Christmas at his parents' house in Vermont, in a warm farmhouse that smelled like cinnamon and pine. My son built a snowman in the yard, laughing as the family dog knocked it over with its tail. I sat on the porch with a mug of chamomile tea, wrapped in a thick blanket, watching the sunset through bare tree branches, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Real, deep, uncomplicated peace. My grandmother called me on New Year's Day. "You did good, sweetheart," she said quietly. "Your grandfather would have been proud of you." I smiled, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "Thanks, Grandma." "Remember this," she said, her voice firm. "People who treat you like an ATM don't get to be surprised when you close the account." She was right. I'd spent 8 years believing that love meant sacrifice, that family meant silence, that keeping the peace was worth losing yourself. I was wrong. Love isn't measured by how much you're willing to lose. It's proven by how much someone respects what you give. My parents chose convenience over connection. They chose Kyle's comfort over my dignity. They chose to take and take and take, then act shocked when I finally said enough. And when I finally stood up for myself, when I used the law and documentation and simple fairness to protect myself, they called it cruelty. But there's nothing cruel about boundaries. There's nothing wrong with expecting fairness. There's nothing weak about walking away from people who only valued you when you were useful. I didn't get an apology. I didn't get closure in the traditional sense, with tears and reconciliation and understanding. But I got something better. I got my money back, my peace back, and my self-respect back. If you've ever been the person everyone takes for granted, the one who gives and gives until there's nothing left, I want you to know something. You don't owe anyone your silence. Not even family. Especially not family. Let me know if you've ever faced something like this. I'd love to hear your story.